I will just say a few words about who I am and how long I've been here at Macalester. This is my 12th year here, and one of the students who was in my very first class in my very first semester is here today, so that's really exciting. I teach in the Environmental Studies department. I also teach courses in the Psychology department because by background and training, I am a cognitive and biological psychologist with my PhD from the University of Minnesota. And I have long been interested in environmental issues, but while I was in graduate school, it was a hobby, I guess, or a passion that I would pursue when I got home from doing my work, my research in my graduate school office. And it wasn't until in the 90s when I was working on my PhD, finishing my PhD, and I had the opportunity to spend some time in Germany. I had a fellowship from the German government. And I got over there to continue working on my cognitive psychology PhD dissertation. And I realized that there was this field that was much better developed in Germany than here that was environmental psychology. Hi, Izzy. Another one of my not students. And so I realized while in Germany that I could bring together the thing that I really loved in grad school with the thing that I was going home and spending all sorts of time on. And that started me on the path that I have continued on ever since. And I was really fortunate. I got back to Minnesota after spending time in Germany, came back, I was doing my PhD at the University of Minnesota, and when I finished, I started teaching as an adjunct at the University of St. Thomas, and I found a couple of colleagues who were similarly interested in bringing together the psychology and the environment. And I did, in 2007 or so, or 2008, I came to give an Enviro Thursday here at Macalester, and that's our weekly Thursday lunchtime series. Come on in and take some seats there. And I talked about the psychology of sustainability. We then were calling it conservation psychology. And the next day I got a call from the chair of environmental studies, Dan Hornbach, saying, hey, we need somebody to teach one more class this coming semester. Do you think you could put together a class on the psychology of sustainability and teach it? And that, I've been here ever since. It was supposed to be a one semester, one class thing. I have now been teaching here full time for, I don't know how many years. It's been probably 8 years full time, and then the years before that were part time. I'm still not on the tenure track. I'm a long-term non-tenure track faculty member in environmental studies, and doesn't look like they will ever get rid of me. So it is a wonderful place to be. I think I am really impressed with Dan Hornbach, who 11 years ago had the foresight to recognize that this field was going to explode as it has in the United States. We've now, I like to say, Germany, it was much further along in Europe 15 years ago. Oh, we've way passed now here in the United States. So, but I still stay in touch with German colleagues, and I speak German. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I talk about in this class, and it's evolved some since Austin took it in 2000, in the spring of 2008, right?
Probably,
yeah. So I want to start by having you reflect for just a second on what made you come to this talk today. Was there something about the topic that made you think, yeah, I want to go sit inside on a beautiful Minnesota June day? maybe talk to somebody next to you for just a minute and share, what was it about this topic that made you say, yes, we're going to go to this? So go ahead and talk with each other a little bit. Oh, you all are good. I had, Izzy was in my environmental justice class this past semester, and your class was the most difficult class to bring back. They once you would start to talk, it was like, ah.
So type of material.
Yep. It was really fun. And so and in my senior seminar this past fall, a lot of the class was this kind of talking with each other, and so we came up with some symbols that they apparently learned in preschool, which is the quiet coyote. And so everybody would raise their hands like this when it was time to be quiet and pay back attention to me. Preschool at Macalester. So now you know a little bit more about why others are here, and I'll tell you about why I am here, why I'm teaching this particular topic. It feels more important and more urgent now than ever. I'm sure that you've heard in the news in the last weeks, months, ever more dire reports of our shared global home and the peril that it is in. And one piece of that is garbage. One piece of that is our waste, our habit, human habit of consumption and waste. And we no longer live in a cycle where our trash becomes food for something else. And I have 2 children, in fact, both of them. I just came this morning, my 14-year-old graduated from 8th grade. She's been in the same class for 8 years, and so I'm still a little bit shaken somehow to say goodbye to that whole era of my life and hers. And I also have a 19-year-old. And they ask me, because we have environmental conversations all the time, and they ask me, well, what does this mean for my future? And it's a really hard question to answer for a young person. So I'm here and I teach this topic because of the trouble that we are in, and I want to give students the tools of psychology to help address these problems. So I like to say that trash, this is a Creative Commons image called beach trash. I was at the beach last summer, and every morning I would take a walk, and every morning I would fill a garbage bag in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts isn't even, the beaches there aren't even the kinds of beaches that have really a real trash problem. I like to say in my psychology class that in fact, trash isn't an environmental problem. It's not an environmental problem, even though it does have landscape impacts, right? We see it, we hear it on the news. It also has wildlife impacts. This is a famous image by visual artist Chris Jordan, who took pictures of, I can't remember which atoll it is, but he took, say it again? Midway. He took lots of pictures of these decomposing birds with all sorts of plastic in their stomachs. And you can Google animals injured by plastic if you want to see hundreds, if not thousands, of really sad pictures of turtles and seals and birds and other animals trapped in plastic trash. We also know, but we don't really know, that our garbage, especially plastic, is having these broad ecosystem impacts. Like, they've recently discovered plastic inside of some of the small organisms that are toward the bottom of the ocean food chain, right? So what does that mean? We don't actually fully know at this point, but we know that it's having broad ecosystem impacts. But I still say it's not an environmental problem. It is, in fact, a human problem, right? And I can tell you it's a human problem for a few reasons. It impacts our health. As I was just saying, scientists have found plastic particles in the smallest creatures of some of the smallest creatures of the ocean ecosystem. What happens when they get eaten by a fish that gets eaten by a fish that we then eat, right? We don't know. But we're beginning to find out more about the human health impacts of plastic trash. But it's also an environmental justice. It's a human to human problem, right? Our trash does not just go away. It goes somewhere. A lot of it lands in landfills. And this is an image from China of a family that makes its living picking through landfill trash and selling the usable things that they can find. And you can find images like this in places around the world where there's high levels of poverty. A lot of our plastic recycling has been landing in countries. You probably have heard that about a year ago, China said, no thanks, United States, you can't send us your plastic trash anymore. And so it's been being sent to Indonesia and Malaysia, both of which countries have recently said, no, United States, and no, Europe, you can't send us your plastic trash anymore either. So it's piling up. Some countries are starting to push back and not take it anymore. Locally, we also have an environmental justice problem on our hands. This is the Herc incinerator. Izzy's class visited it this past fall. It's pretty stinky there, isn't it? And Herc, despite meeting at a higher standard than required by the state for all of its emissions, it is still pumping out some amount of dioxin and other pollutants. It's located in a low-income neighborhood on the north side of the city of Minneapolis. It's high proportion of people of color living in this neighborhood. And the trash from Macalester doesn't go to Herc, it goes to a different incinerator, but a lot of the municipal and business trash from the city of Minneapolis is going to Herc. Wealthier people are producing more trash than poor people, but the poor people are the ones who are breathing the fumes from the incinerator, smelling the bad smells, because this facility is located in their neighborhood. So trash is also an environmental justice problem. And so in my class, Psychology of Sustainable Behavior, we start with the premise that, in fact, garbage is a human behavior problem, right? So it is impacting us, but it is also us who are creating the problem in the first place. And if it's a human behavior problem, then there's a place we can start to look to figure out how to solve it, right? Human behavior. And so that's the starting point for my class, is we acknowledge that there are some conditions, some circumstances under which we need to consume. We will produce trash, and it's okay. And there are some people, who need a straw because of a disability or because of a surgery or whatever it might be. So it's not that the goal is to not have anybody ever use plastic again. But if you think about many of the circumstances under which we use plastic, it's really not that necessary. I mean, any of these bags could be replaced by reusable canvas bags. So 2015. It's called the Plastic Disclosure Project. And they looked globally and estimated the number of plastic items that were being produced and used globally. And what they found was that of all the plastic that's being produced globally, only 33% is being used one time and then thrown away. So that would be that straw, that would be that plastic bag, that would be that plastic chachi, whatever it might be. And then again, globally, of all the plastic that's being produced, only 15% is being recycled. So there are two among many places where human behavior can be improved. So the psychology, I'll take a second here to talk about psychology and where it fits in to the larger picture of solving these problems. Psychology, how many of you studied any psychology in, okay, quite a few of you, here at Macalester?
Yeah.
And anybody beyond that in grad school? All right. Psychology mostly focuses on the individual level behavior. Social psychology does also look at group behavior, group processes, but psychology focuses on what about the individual, what is the condition in which they're living, individual well-being, but also what motivates that individual to behave or not behave in a certain way, to change or not change their behavior. And obviously, the issues that we are confronting are environmental issues, these human behavior issues. They are not problems that individual behavior alone is going to solve, right? These things, what we're talking about are systemic problems. So, but what I want to impart to the students in my classes are the piece that psychology can offer them towards solutions. Insights into how people tick, how they interact with problems like garbage. So in the class, I have it basically broken down into the a barriers section where we think about and talk about what gets in the way of the kind of behavior that would be healthier for humans and for the ecosystem. And then we talk about motivation. And the reason that, I'll get to that in a second. I'll get to it now. The reason that I break it down like that is that one of the experiences I've had over the years of teaching this class, and it's kind of changing, I think, as our society starts to look at things a little bit differently. But at first, in the psychology of sustainable behavior class, and even beyond the walls of Macalester, students would come in and they would say, I want to figure out how to get people to care. I want to learn how to communicate these problems, us is laughing, because nobody cares. And at that time, I think I might have believed that a little bit too. But my experience shows me that in fact, it's not that people don't care. And that's why we have to think about what gets in the way of them acting on the care that they have. Because, okay, I have a lot of relatives who, they really, elderly uncles, who if I start talking to them about my worldview, it's like, oh my God, you crazy liberal, get out of here. And they wouldn't, they will intentionally show me how many plastic bags they brought home from the grocery store, right? But they care, right? There are other things getting in the way. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they want to see seals trapped in plastic. It's not that they want plastic pollution in our world's oceans. There are things getting in the way of them acting on that care. And that's why we talk about barriers in class. Because human behavior is not just about the person. And so in the psychology of sustainable behavior, I can't just talk to students about how to make people care, we also have to think about what are the situations in which people are acting that allow them to act upon the care that they already hold. And I acknowledge in our class that human behavior is often extremely illogical, right? And so you can't, even without any barriers, you can't always count on the person acting upon their care. You really, in some cases, we talk about social engineering. You have to create the situation to force them to act upon their care, which this situation clearly doesn't. A friend of mine who works in New Jersey, she won't, I think she photoshopped this image, she sent it to me, but she says, no, I didn't. It's real. So barriers, behavior equals is a function of the person in the particular situation. And here's just one example that it's a very simple daily example of how even with the best of intentions, if you encounter something like this, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with whatever it is that you have? There's no recycle bin. I don't know where you might be. Perhaps you're at a festival. It takes somebody who is really, really committed and dedicated to be willing to carry their trash or their recycling around with them for the rest of the day, as opposed to throwing it in the corner under that garbage can. So we always have to think about the situation that people find themselves in, because only the most committed person is going to overcome all the barriers. And even the most committed person may not be able to overcome all the barriers. Barriers can be just about anything. It can be a lack of the right infrastructure, which on this campus, that is not an excuse. You've seen that we have the recycling, the trash, and the compost. In other places, other campuses, there's no compost bin. A lot of campuses are working on that. Barriers can be, it takes too much time. A barrier could be, I don't know how to do this, and so I can't do it right. Barriers can also be a perception. A lot of people don't feel comfortable. A lot of people in my neighborhood, we live a 15-minute walk from the light rail, but their perception is it's not safe to walk at night to that light rail. And so they won't do it. I don't know if their perception is accurate or not, but it's their perception and it stops them from doing it. Social barriers are huge. And the thing about the social barriers to a behavior is that we don't realize that we are being stopped by social influence. We don't realize that what's stopping us from carrying that canvas bag is because we don't know if, what are people going to think of me if I'm carrying that canvas bag? It's an unconscious process. But all of these are barriers that stop us from acting upon what we may want to do anyway. All right. So then, once the students and I have talked about barriers, and I've had them do some barrier analysis, one of the things we do in the class, the first thing we do is a zero waste project. I've changed it since you were in the class. The first time I did the class, everybody got to pick their own behavior, and I think you picked something. A lot of people in your class picked showers, like they were going to take shorter showers. But after many years of teaching this class, I realized that making everybody go 10 days of producing no trash is the best project, because they all have a similar experience. They come together, they share notes, and in fact, I even had Izzy's environmental justice class do the same thing. And I give each student a little mason jar, and because inevitably they produce some trash, and sometimes it doesn't fit in the mason jar. But most of the time, it's things like granola wrappers, or things like, oh, my mom sent me a package, and there are candy wrappers in there. Band-Aids. there are things like that. And so I have them go for 10 days without producing any trash. And what I have them pay attention to is, this is just about the best circumstances possible for producing no trash, right? We've got all of the infrastructure here. You're very motivated because I'm giving you a grade. And we have all sorts of resources for you to talk through how you do this. If you can't do it under these circumstances, think about being out there in the rest of the world doing this. And inevitably, they still produce some trash. And so it's a chance to think about, well, what was the barrier that stopped you from coming to class with an empty jar? So it's great to think about the many ways that our infrastructure stops us from being able to live out a goal like being zero waste. It's also a great opportunity for students to develop a little bit, and my students, you Macalester people, you have really high empathy anyway, but they come to see the rest of the world and that person at Walgreens who got one thing and took a bag, instead of feeling that anger and frustration, they now feel a little bit more empathy. Like, I understand. I tried to do this, and I know how hard it is. So then we move into talking about, okay, we know there are barriers. We know that if we want to create a zero-waste world, we have to think about these barriers, and we have to think about ways to remove them. But how are we going to get there? We're going to get there, we get back to that person in the equation, right? The people, all of us, need to want to get there. So how can we build the kind of motivation in ourselves and in everybody that everybody wants to reach this zero-waste goal? And so I talk about many more things than this in class. We talk about them in class. But I'll just talk about 3 really big categories, really important categories. The first are the social and cultural norms around garbage. And here's a picture that Macalester students have been. They are less so now, but they have been during the time I've been here, 12 years, 11 years, notorious dumpster divers. Right? Proud dumpster divers. And yes, I see one right here. But the rest of the world looks at this behavior and thinks, oh, gross, right? Like, why would you do that? It's not normal to do that. But in class we talk about, yeah, but is it normal that these chains can throw away perfectly good food, right? Why is that normal and this is not normal? It's an arbitrary, but a norm that has developed over time, that has been encoded in policy, that allows these stores to do this thing that is clearly wrong, but we don't really think about it as a society. And so these social norms, what is acceptable, and they do become encoded in policy, what's normal versus what's not normal, stops us from acting upon our desire to live in a more ecologically sound way. Because this kind of human feedback acts upon us at a very visceral level. It comes from our human evolution, right? We evolved, we survived because we cooperated in these small groups. And what happened to the one individual who transgressed a group norm, who did something that the rest of the group thought, ooh, that wasn't good? They were out. They were out, and it pretty much meant certain death. And so we have encoded this at an unconscious level, and we have this very fine radar that we are always gauging. Okay, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? Do they think I'm okay? And if we get a signal that we're not okay, our heart starts to beat faster, our palms start to sweat, we freak out. And we now, we know, and I talk to students about this, that the being trash-free is going to put you in a situation where your friends or your roommates are going to look at you and they're going to say, oh my God, do you have to? Can't we just go to this party and have fun? Do you have to ruin this? And you're going to feel really awful because you're breaking a social norm. And it is very human. So be prepared to feel uncomfortable. But the other thing that we need to work on as a society is we need to change the norms, right? So this is a 2017 grad. Her name is Alyssa Erding, and she still lives around town, and she and I get together once a month or so, and we go for walks, and we pick up trash on our walks. And we were picking up trash on one of our walks, and we went to put it in this dumpster next to an apartment building, and Alyssa is much taller than me. And she looked in and she was like, oh my God, Christie, there's a box full of perfectly good dishes in this dumpster. So she climbed in and grabbed these dishes out, and I just had to take a picture of one of my students dumpster diving very happily. But Alyssa is one of those people, she lives zero waste. She's produced about this much trash in the last 3 years. Yeah, she has a teeny tiny little mason jar. It's mostly filled with the little stickers that are on fruits because they're not compostable or recyclable. She's changing the social norms. She goes into Breadsmith and she asks, she's a chocolate babka addict, and she'll go get her chocolate babka, but she'll bring a little cloth napkin and she'll say, can you just put that on the cloth napkin for me? And I was in Breadsmith one day and I brought my napkin and got something, and the woman behind the counter said, yeah, there's this woman who comes in, young woman who comes in and does this all the time. And she started me doing XYZ, and my friend has started to do XYZ. And so just this one person can be this node of social norm change. By Alyssa doing things differently, she is making it possible for other people to do it differently too. We can also change social norms by giving people positive feedback when we see them doing something. I can't tell you the number of times lately, this is so strange. I do go for trash walks all the time, and lately a lot of people have been stopping and saying thank you to me for doing that. And even though I study the psychology of this, and I know that they're just giving me positive social norm feedback, I still think, oh, okay, this motivates me to keep doing more of this because I might get more thank yous. And every time somebody sneers at me, it does kind of bring me down a little bit, like, oh, I'm not being normal. So we can change the social norms by giving people positive feedback. We can give businesses positive feedback. This is Spy House Coffee up Snelling Avenue. It's new in the last couple of years, so wasn't here when all of you were studying here. And they have a little bit of information, and they say, we're not going to give you a straw unless you ask for it. Tell that business, hey, thank you for doing that. This is really cool that you're doing that. Another way to spread social norms, is to demonstrate, to put out there the things that you're doing and offer your expertise. In Minneapolis, they have what they call organics captains, compost captains, and so you can ask the city you do a little bit of training, and then you can put this sign in your yard, and if neighbors have questions about how to how to compost, they know that there's somebody in their neighborhood who's doing it. And they know that somebody in their neighborhood is doing it. So, okay, if somebody else is doing it, I So that's social norms. So that's the first thing that we talk about in class after barriers. The second thing that we talk about is identity. And about 10 years ago, my colleagues at St. Thomas and I did this research where we asked St. Thomas students, what comes to mind when you hear the word environmentalist? Well, guess what? It pretty much exactly matched this guy. It was tree hugger, barefoot, dirty, vegetarian, hippie, and these were not really favorable adjectives that they came up with. And I'm sure, I've never done the research here at Macalester, but I'm sure the terms would be different. But when a behavior like being zero waste is associated with an identity that you don't hold as your own, and you think of as the other, and even as an unappealing other, then you don't want to participate in that behavior. And right now, in our world, there are two really strong, polarized political identities out there. And right now, as I told you about my uncle, my older uncle and aunt, the green behaviors are associated with liberals. And this makes it really difficult, as long as that association holds. It puts up a barrier for people who don't hold a liberal political identity to participate. Even though I know my aunt and uncle, they love the outdoors, they love nature, they want a safe, clean environment into the future. But as long as they think that bringing your own bag to the grocery store is a sign of being liberal, they're not going to do it. And so we talk in class about how to change that. And one of the pieces of research that I find most helpful in understanding the differences between liberals and conservatives is the work of Jonathan Haidt, who is a psychologist who's written a book on the moral foundations of human behavior. You're nodding, you know it. And what he suggests, his theory suggests, is that there are basically 6 foundations, moral foundations, upon which human beings make decisions. There is the dimension of doing no harm. I don't want to do things that harm others. There is a dimension of it is not oppressing anybody. It is enhancing people's liberty and freedom. Fairness, it's being fair to others. And these are of the 6, those 3 are the ones that liberal people hold dearest. Conservative people, however, hold all 6 equally, whereas liberal people, according to Jonathan Haidt's research, tend to downplay the importance of being aligning under authority, doing what the person in authority says you should do. Sanctity or purity, so doing things that are clean and right. And then being loyal to your group. So whereas liberals tend to focus on these 3 and exclude these 3, conservatives value all 6 equally. And if you think about during the 2016 election, prior to when Bernie Sanders was still in the running, his rhetoric was all about these things. Whereas the Republican rhetoric does invoke these terms in a way that liberal political rhetoric does not. And when I talk about this with students, it's a little bit of an aha moment, and it's also another moment of empathy, I think, where it helps all of us, myself included, because I can sometimes be a little bit of a uncle and aunt conservative basher. And helps me understand that it's not that anybody is out there doing things because they have bad intentions or bad morals. It is just that they are thinking about these things using different moral dimensions. So that also is an identity question, and it helps students understand why their identities might not align with some of the green behaviors that have come to be seen as liberal behaviors. So then the final key to motivation that I talk about with students, we talk about my very favorite psychological theory. I love this theory. Self-determination theory has been around since the 90s. DC and Ryan are the authors of self-determination theory. It is a theory of human motivation, and it posits that you will be motivated to take an action, to engage in any type of action to the extent that it supports three basic psychological needs. And those three basic psychological needs, which have been supported cross-culturally, so they do appear to be, at least to some extent, human needs, cross-cultural human needs. They are a need to feel competent, so to be effective in what you do, to have mastery experiences. There's a need for autonomy, so I get to pick what I do versus being told by somebody else as the parent of two teenagers. Autonomy is a big one in our lives right now. And then relatedness, the basic human need to be on good terms with important others, close relationships. And any action that we ask people to do that might conflict with these needs, they are going to step away and not want to participate at all. And so think about some of the things that go along with the zero waste lifestyle. Think about shopping when you're zero waste. How many of you have tried shopping in the bulk section? How was it? Was it intimidating the first time? Yes. A St. Olaf student one time, when a friend of mine, my friend at St. Thomas and I gave a little workshop at St. Olaf, this young man came up afterwards and he said, "Oh my God, a friend of mine asked me just last week if he could come shopping with me because he wants to bulk shop, but he's afraid. And he wanted me to just take him along and show him the ropes so that he wouldn't feel stupid bulk shopping for the first time." And so that was a threat to his competence. And so if we give people the opportunity to do something in a safe environment where they can practice and make mistakes and not feel stupid, they can build a sense of competence. The organics captain, I recycle organics sign, this is another way to help people build competence, offering yourself as an expert in a non-judgmental way. Alyssa is helping people build competence. She started her own zero waste consulting called Zilchin Consulting, and she is working with individuals and businesses to help them move towards zero waste. And there are lots of resources out there. This happens to be Alyssa's favorite book, The Zero Waste Home by Bea Johnson. And Bea is now a worldwide speaker on the zero waste lifestyle, and she has a following of thousands and thousands, maybe a million at this point. Certainly hundreds of thousands. All right, so that's competence. The second basic human need is the need for autonomy, right? And so legislation that just boom makes plastic bags no longer allowed, that's a total threat to autonomy, right? Businesses, individuals, if you are making a rule and taking away my choice, I'm going to find a way around your stupid rule, right? Remember a bunch of years ago, so the Trump administration has recently reversed these standards, but there were light bulb standards put in place to phase out incandescent light bulbs. So I was in this special light bulb store in Portland, Oregon. We had a faculty development trip to Portland, Oregon a couple years ago, and they took us to this one light bulb shop, and this sign was hanging in the window. And it says, supporting Americans' right to choose whatever damn bulb we want to use. So I remember when the light bulb standards were being put into place, as they were phasing out the incandescent light bulbs, there were these anecdotal reports of people going to Walmart or Target and buying 1,000 incandescent light bulbs to store in their basement because people were going to take away their right to have their light bulb. So again, it's a threat to people's autonomy, and they are going to find a way around it if you take away their autonomy. And then finally, the human basic need of relatedness. People want to be in community with important others. And if you're doing something like the idea of taking your own bag being a liberal thing, and if I happen to be conservative, then I would be afraid taking a reusable bag because one of my friends might see me and think, oh my God, what happened to you? You're not one of us anymore. And so to the extent that you can encourage behaviors to be done in community, you can provide relatedness to help people move through the kinds of change that we want to see out there in the world. Now, the final thing that I talk about with my students in class is what I said at the beginning. We know that individual behavior is not enough, right? It makes a difference for me to be zero waste as an individual, but not a whole lot of difference. It makes a difference that Alyssa is out there changing social norms. But our individual change is not touching the systems that we live in, that these systems curtail and prevent all of us from ever really reaching truly zero waste. You go to a place like Trader Joe's, where a lot of students do their grocery shopping. Everything is wrapped in plastic. Just about anywhere you go that is affordable for students, especially even the healthy food, is wrapped in layers of packaging. So we need systems change. We need for these bigger things to change for us to truly be able to be zero waste. Each American every day produces 4.4 pounds of trash. So 1.5 pounds of that actually is recycled. And of the remaining 2.9 pounds, a full 55% is actually our personal trash. The other 45% is trash that is produced somewhere in the process before we even get to the product. So it's produced in construction, it's produced in production, it's produced in agriculture, whatever it might be. A large part of that is also organic matter that could just be put in the compost. So Minneapolis has a system for organic composting. We also need to think about changing the system that says it's okay to waste food too, right? But the point is, individual behavior is important, but not enough. And so what can we do from the standpoint of psychology? And a couple of years ago, my colleagues and I published a review article in the journal Science, where we talked about the role of psychology in bringing about systems change. And what we we talked about are that the person has all these different circles or spheres of influence. And as you move outward in the circle, you get to higher impact. So when I talk with my students, I say, yeah, I hope that some of you become policymakers. I want you to practice writing op-eds to get your thoughts out there and change people's opinions. Let's work at the wider spheres of influence. But I want to focus on two in particular for individual behavior to change the larger systems. So working at the collective level, it's totally fine and great to be a node of social influence as an individual. It's even more powerful, say, a group of students here at Macalester, fossil-free Macalester, have been working to get the institution to divest from fossil fuels. If Macalester as an institution divests from fossil fuels, that will have an impact, right? That will, we will be an organizational leader among organizations. And so being a node of social change in this collective to allow this institution to make measurable change. And then the other place where individuals can make a big difference is to put pressure on people who hold what's called legitimate power, elected officials. It's in contrast to referent power, which we all hold because we are connected to other people. We are reference for them. So putting pressure on people who have power. We all know people who might be a CEO of an organization or who are friends with or married to somebody who has political power. We should all not be afraid to use our personal connections to move organizations. We're all part of organizations. We can talk to our boss to move organizations. So those are two pathways for individual change to lead to collective change. And I like to talk with my students about I'd like to end on the hopeful note. This is called the Amoeba of social change. It comes from Alan Atkinson's Believing Cassandra. And we, as social creatures in our society, we are all connected to one another. And our society is floating around out there, and as some of us push for change, we may get some resistance from those who are still part of our society. They're not iconoclasts rejecting society. They're still part of our society. They may push back, but the more we build support for the change we want to see, the more our amoeba is going to move in that direction. And it may stretch out for a while, but because we are all connected, eventually they will come along. Eventually, nobody is going to be burning coal anymore. People may be pushing back on that idea right now, right? People may be pushing back on the idea that it's still okay to use plastic bags. But eventually, our society and our social norms are going to change to the extent that everybody's going to come along because the policy's going to change, and they're going to have to. But we've got to build that social pressure at this leading edge first to move our society there. The climate march and this is also Naomi Klein, to change everything, it takes everyone. So that is all I have. That was a lot. Thank you so much for being here.